Bet with your friends on WynnBET Sportsbook today using promo code BlueWire to get up to $1,000 toward a risk-free sports bet. Sign up now at WYNNBet.com. Offer subject to change, terms and conditions at WynnBET.com. Must be 21 or older and present in the state where playthrough WynnBET is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.
What is crack-a-lackin', Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale coming at you once more without my fantabulous co-host, Adam Frommel. Our team look-ahead train rolls onward. We're up to the Sacramento Kings. Greg Wissinger from the Kings Herald was kind enough to join me. He is the managing editor there. Follow the Kings Herald, which does great work at the Kings Herald. He's also a freelancer for the Sacramento Bee. And you can follow Greg on Twitter at GWiss, at GWISS. Fantastic follow on Twitter. I highly recommend it. Before we get started, the usual housekeeping notes. Please, pretty please continue rating, reviewing, and subscribing to Hardwood Knocks wherever you get your podcasts. Subscriptions and downloading every episode helps out a ton for us. If you do not use iTunes, we still ask that if you have access to it, head over there, throw us a 5-star rating, write a review. Both of those help us out a ton in the charts too. If this is your first time listening to Hardwood Knocks because you love the Sacramento Kings or you are just here at random, consider throwing us that permanent subscription, working us into your podcast rotation. We cover the NBA at large. We're pleasantly sub-mediocre and modestly insufferable. Follow us on Twitter at Hardwood Knocks. You can follow our YouTube channel, youtube.com, search Hardwood Knocks. We will come up, subscribe there. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Hardwood_Knocks. Let's get to some great and in-depth Sacramento Kings talk. A truly fascinating team, by the way, the Kings are heading into this season. But let's talk some Kings now with Greg Wissinger from the Kings Herald. Greg, thank you so much for coming back on the Hardwood Knocks podcast for our Sacramento Kings look ahead. This is the third consecutive year that you've done it. So as you mentioned before the podcast, you're officially a glutton for punishment. I appreciate it. Before we dive into Sacramento Kings basketball, though, first and foremost, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. You know, it was a long day, but I have a podcast to do. So, you know, that's always a highlight because I get to talk basketball and get to talk about the Kings and look at the season ahead. And things haven't gone off the rails for the Kings yet. So it's an exciting time.
Their offseason was like super low key. The thing that stood out to me is, I guess, one, that it was so low key. And then two, I didn't think I was banging the Richaun home drums all year that he was going to probably price himself out of Sacramento. And I was just shocked that they were able to keep him on the early bird deal. Just what were before we sort of dig into the nitty gritty stuff on them, do you have any just general thoughts or impressions or takeaways from the offseason that you're kind of harping on as we head into the regular season?
You know, I mean, keeping Holmes was a huge win for the Kings. That they couldn't really afford to lose him because they didn't have any money. If he left, I mean, they re-signed him with bird rights. If he was gone, they wouldn't have been able to replace him. I mean, they would have been kind of scraping the bargain bin of free agency. And so being able to keep him at what I feel is a below value contract for what he does for the team was huge. Kings got really lucky because we spent most of the year thinking, okay, they're going to be kind of priced out of this. We thought, you know, maybe they should have made some trades at the deadline to kind of open up some of that offseason cap space so that they could have gone over those early bird rights. But it worked out really well. And I'm glad that the gamble paid off because he's so important to what they are trying to accomplish this year.
Luke Walton had to be kidding when he said that, like, the Tristan Thompson at center starting lineup was a legitimate possibility, right? Like, I would call for him to be fired on the spot if they actually rolled that out in the regular season.
I'd be very shocked. To me, that's more of a, you know, if Holmes is banged up or needs a night off or something like that. I mean, you never really know with Luke Walton. I mean, he's done some crazy things with lineups, and you know, there's plenty of people in Sacramento that would be calling for him to be fired even without that lineup change. But I don't see a scenario where there's a healthy Richaun Holmes and Tristan Thompson is starting. That being said, I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah, so that being said, Holmes got the starting job as a guy who came in as like the third string center or the second string center, and just the starter played like crap. It was Dwayne Dedmon, and so Walton has been always willing to just play whoever's playing best. I mean, I think that is one thing we can give him credit for because he's the reason Holmes was given that bigger shot to prove himself and is now established as a starting level center in the league.
Is he going to shoot 1,000,000,000% on push shots again?
Oh yeah, I mean that's automatic. I mean it's the most reliable shot in the NBA.
Just so good at it. I'm obligated to ask this before we actually talk about the Kings, and which is why the Kings were left so long until the end of the Kings and the Timberwolves. I just wasn't sure what was going to happen with the Ben Simmons stuff with regard to them. How do you feel about Simmons's potential fit in Sacramento? And just as, if you're Monty McNair, what would be a realistic package you'd actually be willing to give up for him? That's not, like Buddy Hield and Louis King. Like, you're not getting Ben Simmons for Buddy Hield and Louis King.
Right. I mean, the go-to package among Kings fans is like Buddy Hield, Marvin Bagley, and 2 firsts. And I'm just like, if that was getting the job done, it would have happened like months ago. Like the Kings are not like, grasping at holding on to that. And I mean, even with the kind of crazy expectations that Morey's floating out there, I don't see it ever getting to that being the best offer that Philly can get. To me, the package that always made a lot of sense was something involving Harrison Barnes. I think Harrison Barnes would be a really nice fit in Philly. The cap mechanics, and I haven't checked it recently. I don't know if it changes at all with the season actually starting, but at least in the offseason, the cap mechanics worked where Philly could send out Simmons and take back both Buddy Hield and Harrison Barnes contracts. I think that would be more than the Kings would ideally want to give up. And then you got some spacing concerns, because Barnes and Buddy Hield are 2 of their more reliable 3-point threats as far as spacing the floor. But something like that, I mean, after the preseason, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but you could even fit Mitchell into that deal under the cap. I mean, that's a nice combination. That, maybe a pick or 2. That's a nice combination of win now players, some future assets with Davion and the picks. I mean, that to me seemed like the best Sacramento could offer. I don't know if it makes sense to them. And the sense I get right now is that the Kings are happy to try what they have now. And their offer may change a little bit if they kind of stumble out the gate and, maybe the good vibes go away and, the regular season reality sets in that this isn't going to work. That's where I can see the offers really shifting. And I think that's what Philly's counting on too.
The Kings and the Spurs seem like the 2 teams where Philly settles and is willing to go the non-star route. They have like the nice blend of players who fit. They can probably include a young player, and then in picks. So it just feels like those 2 teams have the best balancing out packages. Do you like the idea of De'Aaron Fox and Ben Simmons playing on the same team though?
Yeah, I mean, so the kind of the line in the sand, at least based on current reporting, is that the Kings won't even entertain a package that involves De'Aaron Fox or Tyrese Haliburton. And I don't think they should. I mean, Ben Simmons, I think, would be a great addition if you can put him next to those 2 guys. Because almost any package going out of Sacramento for Simmons is probably going to include Buddy Hield, just because the Sixers are going to want that shooting around Embiid. You got salary matching. But then now you got Fox, who has not been a good 3-point shooter, and you've got Simmons, who is a non-existent 3-point shooter, and you've lost your volume 3-point shooter that spaces your floor. So there are definitely some fit concerns. Haliburton showed some nice touch from 3. Harrison Barnes, like I mentioned before, if you still have him, I think there's things you can do with spacing. To me, though, for all the concerns that there would be about roster fit and all those different dynamics, I'm still in favor of it if you're keeping Fox and Haliburton. I mean, Fox, Haliburton, Simmons, that's a really nice young trio of players who, for whatever they can't do, they can do a lot of other things really well, and I'd be excited to see how it would work. I think it's a gamble worth taking for a team that's been bad for as long as the Kings have been.
I'd probably be with you. I'd also be shocked if Philly did a deal that didn't include. I don't think they should include Fox at all. Maybe if the dynamics of this season change a little bit, they move off of Haliburton. But I love Haliburton, and I'd actually be more intrigued with like Simmons and Haliburton playing together defensively. Would be one of the things I'd love to see. De'Aaron Fox coming off a monster year. What's the next frontier for him? That's the question I ask you every single time you're on this podcast, I feel like.
Well, and what's been fun is every single year, De'Aaron Fox has made a steady leap forward. And this year, I don't know, if you or your listeners have seen the pictures, but De'Aaron Fox came into camp just like jacked. I mean, for compared to the skinny kid he came into the league as, he has put on a ton of muscle. I mean, he's still skinny when he stands next to like any other normal human, but for De'Aaron Fox standards, like, and when I say normal human, I'm not talking you or I'm talking about NBA players, right?
I'm insulted, but carry on.
But he has put on a ton of muscle, which De'Aaron Fox was already near the top of the league as far as drawing fouls and getting in the lane, creating contact, getting to the line. So really, I mean, the next steps for him are making more free throws. He's not been a good free throw shooter, despite getting to the league at a top 10 rate. He has not been a good three-point shooter. That could be a big step forward. If he develops a three-point shot to go along with his speed, I think that could really open up some things, just for the Kings as a whole, not just for his game. But really the big thing for him is defense. He's quick enough. He's capable of being a good defender. We just haven't seen the consistent engagement on that side of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And for a team that was the worst defensive team in the NBA last year and the second worst defensive team in NBA history last year, having your star point guard give a damn on defense would be a step forward that I'd like to see.
There's literally nowhere for them to go but up defensively. What's the path to them just being measurably better? Aside, you have Davion Mitchell now, which is huge. And then if you're saying if De'Aaron Fox gets better on that end, you do have Tyrese Haliburton, who is just ubiquitous in the passing lanes. That dude is fun to watch.
Yeah.
But is there can they get materially better with the personnel that they have? I guess you brought back Harkless, and Thompson could be okay, and Richaun Holmes is not the worst defensive center by a long shot. You do look at on paper, I wouldn't expect them to be a good defensive team, but I feel like they should not be historically bad.
Completely agree. I mean, talent-wise, they have players capable of playing defense. I mean, Marvin Bagley is not good at defense. Buddy Hield is really bad at defense, and I think a big part of the issue last year was the Kings spent so many minutes playing both of them at the same time. And when you have two really bad defenders on the floor at once, combined with the scheme the Kings ran last year where they switched everything and never varied from that at all, it was the easiest thing in the world for opponents to just run screens and get switches and then just exploit two terrible defenders. I think staggering those 2 minutes, I think just having a scheme that isn't 100% switch everything all the time, because the personnel is good enough to be not a great defense, but not, like you said, historically bad. If you just have a scheme that doesn't put your players in terrible positions all the time, I think that'll help. And they did get rid of their quote unquote defensive coordinator. The defensive expert that they brought in last year was Rex Clayman. He's now in Detroit. And they brought in Mike. I haven't had to pronounce his name out loud. I've written it. Borango, I think is his last name. But defensive guy has been in the league for a long time, has been on some really good defensive teams and has also been on some not great defensive teams. So we'll see if his scheme maybe works out a little bit better. But there have been promising signs in preseason and even going back to the California Classic that they do in Sacramento, just that led by Mitchell, there's a little bit more of an emphasis of there's players around who actually do care about playing defense, and that's a nice step forward.
My last note on the Aaron Fox, since that was the defensive thing that you mentioned, caught my attention. I think people probably focus too much on players. Like, jumpers are definitely swing skills, but you get to a point where he's in year 6 for him? That was year 5, year 6?
Year 5.
Year 5. So maybe he's just never an above average 3-point shooter. That said, do you know what he shot on step back threes last year?
On step back threes?
He was 23 of 56, which is a very small sample, but it's still over 40%. Is that and I was watching them, and it kind of feels like those could be a thing. 41.1% is really high. The fact that he's even taking that shot, though, just feels like an additional way that he's putting pressure on defense. If that thing is even falling at 33 or 34% clip, I don't know if he's improving his foul shooting. And you're saying he's stronger, and he already shot 70% at the rim last year. He's going to shoot 75% at the rim. I'm just this might be the season in which I'm most intrigued to watch him since he was a rookie.
So there's a very real path to him being an average or above average 3-point shooter. I mean, he is really good on just catch and shoots. He's really good at threes from the corner. the biggest thing that drags down his percentage is he takes a lot of off the dribble, like pull up threes at the top of the key, which makes a lot of sense for point guards, right? I mean, that's where they're naturally at. A lot of time they have the ball in the hand, they're dribbling, but he's terrible at those, or at least was last year. So if he can improve that, or at least make those a smaller part of his overall number of attempts, it could shift that overall average quite a bit to where when he is taking threes, opponents are paying a little bit more attention to it.
When it comes to hiring, there is no shame in needing an assist to score. Indeed has helped businesses stay competitive with their hiring, and they can do it for you too. Get started right now with $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/BlueWire. Indeed is a hiring partner that gets you what you really want, a short list of quality candidates as fast as possible, because you can do it all. Attract, interview, and hire all at Indeed. Get a $75 credit. You heard me. At Indeed.com/BlueWire. One of the things I love about Indeed is that it makes hiring all in one place so easy. Whenever I was looking for a job, Indeed was the very first place I go. Indeed.com/BlueWire. Offer valid through December 31st. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Shopify is the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Shopify gives entrepreneurs the resources that were once reserved for big business. So upstarts, startups, and established businesses alike can sell everywhere, synchronize online and in-person sales, and effortlessly stay informed. Scaling your business is a journey of endless possibility. Believe me, my fishing company that I started 5 years ago with my best friend Aaron, called Woo Tungsten. Actually, it's pronounced Woo Tungsten, because that's the sound you make when you catch a giant fish. Woo! We started this company 5 years ago, November of 2016, and we've been on Shopify since day one. We sell tungsten fishing weights, and our business would be nowhere close to where it is today if it wasn't for Shopify making things so incredibly easy. And like mine, Shopify powers over 1.7 million businesses from first sale to full scale. You can reach customers online and across social networks with an ever-growing suite of channel integrations and apps, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and more. You can gain insights as you grow, and they have detailed reporting of conversion rates, profit margins, and beyond. More than a store, Shopify grows with you. This is possibility powered by Shopify. Go to shopify.com/BlueWire. That's all lowercase for a free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business with Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/BlueWire right now. That's shopify.com/BlueWire. Shopify.com/BlueWire.
Tyrese Haliburton, I feel like people have already written him off as this guy who can't become like an all-star in the league. Is there a pathway to him becoming an all-star in the league? Am I sipping too much Tyrese Haliburton Kool-Aid? Like, what would be the pathway to him kind of having even a fringe star breakout? It's just people just assume he's like this glue guy. He was just so good as a rookie and did so much. I'm like, do we really need to put like that low of a ceiling on him right now? He hasn't even started year two.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that people are putting this lid on the guy who was like a top 3 rookie and contributed in every facet of the game. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, crazy disruptive in passing lanes. He's not the best on-ball defender, but I mean, great team defender and opportunistic defender. Contributes in a lot of different ways on offense. I mean, brilliant passing. His court vision's fantastic. Good three-point shooter. I mean, the really big thing is probably going to be just kind of, he was very opportunistic with his scoring and didn't shoot a lot. I mean, he's not a volume scorer at this point, or at least as a rookie. So it's probably more, breaking guys down off the dribble, which he has the handles to be able to do. It's just not a big part of his game so far. And then getting to the rim and getting to the line. I mean, he obviously is another guy similar to Fox where he's on the skinnier side. So he's come in with a little bit more muscle this year. And, as the years go on, we would expect most NBA players do add muscle over time and, get to the rim more, draw more fouls. I mean, that's kind of where that progression comes from. I don't think it's fair to put any sort of limit on what he can do given what we saw his rookie year. He is just such a smart, intuitive basketball player where his understanding of the game is not like most rookies. And that's the part you can't teach. He's got the athletic ability as well. So it's really just a matter of what does he add to the game? How does it come together? It's not to say he's ever going to be a superstar necessarily, but I think he can be a lot more than just a basic glue guy that is, your forever seventh man on a championship team, which is kind of the narrative that sometimes was out there last season.
How did you feel initially about the Davion Mitchell pick? Were you more open-minded to it than NBA Twitter at large? And then just based off what you've seen in Summer League and, since making the pick, how do you like his fit with this team now?
So I was completely thrown off when the pick was made. It's been kind of funny that we do a lot of pre-draft coverage at the Kings Herald, and he was a guy that we just didn't really pay much attention to just because it seemed like such an unlikely pick that, an older rookie, to where, there's not viewed as having as much upside, fairly or unfairly. And just the positional duality with the backcourt for the Kings was set. You've got Fox, you've got Haliburton. Like, why would the Kings be looking at a point guard? But then, you see what he does in the California Classic and now in preseason and the reports out of training camp. And it's easy to see what the Kings saw in him. I mean, the defensive mindset, the tough note, the just how driven he is on defense. It's fun to watch. I mean, not many guys get highlight packages in Summer League from their defense. And he absolutely did. I mean, he is so much fun to watch play defense, which even if you're a basketball nerd, there's not a lot of guys that are really fun to watch play defense. And he's one of those guys. And then he does have an offense as well. Like, he's not a complete disaster on the offensive side of the ball like most defensive specialists. So having him and the idea of running the 3-guard lineup, we'll see how it works. I have my concerns, but I'm excited to see how it goes. And I do believe in him as an NBA player. And it's easy to see how he could end up being viewed as kind of a steal for how far down he was taken.
What's great about watching him play defense is that you don't need to understand how NBA defense is actually supposed to work to appreciate just what he's doing. Like, he is that James Bouknight game in Summer League. He just wore that dude's skin as decoration. It was just absolutely incredible to watch. You did say that you think the 3-guard lineup, you're worried about how it's going to fare. I am of the mind of fuck it. Roll that out. I want it to be a staple. Do you think that it's going to be a staple? Is it going to get a real chance to see if it works, or are they going to stagger those 3 a little bit more than perhaps I would like them to? This is my vanity question.
I think you're going to see a lot of 3-guard lineup in Sacramento because if you look at the way that roster is constructed, they don't have a lot of choice. Yeah. They have 2.5 guys that are considered actual NBA small forwards, like Harrison Barnes, who has spent most of his time playing power forward the past 2 years and just had one of the best years of his career, top to bottom primarily at the power forward position. So he is primarily a 4 at this point in his career and in the modern NBA. Mo Harkless kind of goes between 3 and 4, but he's probably, I don't know if he excels as like a traditional 3 necessarily. He can slide back and forth. And then you've got Louis King, who is on a 2-way contract and has some upside and potential, but he's still a guy on a 2-way contract. That's it. That's our options for small forwards. There's no one else. And they have a bunch of guys that can all play in different combos in 3-guard lineups. I mean, Mitchell, Fox, Haliburton, Buddy Hield, and then Terrence Davis. And Luke Walton has said kind of the gauntlet that he threw down for his guards is like, hey, this is the way you guys all get playing time, but only as long as you guys are getting stops and getting rebounds, which I think is the right way to approach that. Like, if you can get some stops and get rebounds and it's not as a complete disaster on that end, why not run 3 guards? It's not going to hurt you because the offense will be great. So it's really just going to come down to the defensive side of the ball, and if it hurts the Kings too much there, that's the only thing that's going to derail it. But there's a decent chance that does derail it.
Is that perhaps a reason? This is not necessarily related to the 3-guard lineup, but you're mentioning like the dearth of pure wings. Is that why it seems like Kings fans have become so high on Louis King? Just because like the idea of him is like an actual wing. And I know he's just on a 2-way contract, but you just look at their depth chart. Buddy Hield's gonna have to play like a lot of small forward at this point, it looks like. And as you already mentioned with Harrison Barnes, I'm not crazy with like even he or Harkless having to log 3, like that's not ideal. Or is there actually something to Louis King? Like I haven't watched full Louis King games. I'm gonna just call it right up, but like watching film of him, like it seems like he's really feisty on defense, but is he someone that you view that could actually, again, 2-way contract aside, could actually help this team, or is this just, we like Louis King better than Robert Woodard, and that doesn't really say anything in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, so I think some of it comes from he had like a 24-point game in like the last 2 games of last season. That kind of garbage point of the season. The Kings were eliminated from playing. Nothing mattered. They weren't playing guys. And it's kind of a tradition in Sacramento that towards the end of our season, nothing matters, and they play some guy who's at the end of the bench. He puts up 20 points, and then we spend the whole offseason thinking he's going to be great. Louis King then came into Summer League and had a really solid Summer League showing overall. He was a big part of, and again, it seems silly to get worked up over it, but the Kings winning Summer League, like, Kings fans have fun with that because what else do we have to be excited about? It's the only way we win championships is Summer League. But he was a big part of that team as well. And he has a little bit of everything. Like, I don't know what his one definable NBA skill is that makes him stick and stand out, but he does a little bit of everything, which is not bad from a bench wing player. I think he's a fantastic value on a 2-way contract. I wouldn't be entirely surprised if he ended up earning a full roster spot at some point. And I never want to rule out a guy just because he starts on a 2-way contract. Obviously, guys can turn that into a legit NBA career. But I do think some of it is just it's offseason and we're Kings fans and we get hyped about guys with potential and guys who do a few things well, and then we get excited and we buy into them and they become our large adult sons.
Preseason, there's nothing like training camp and preseason optimism. There's nothing like it. So where do you land on the completely shifting gears here? Where do you land on the Marvin Bagley hope meter? And is there a hope meter for him in Sacramento long term?
I would still be very surprised if he is with the Kings long term. I mean, they've been not so quietly shopping him since the trade deadline last year. I think he actually ended up getting hurt like a week before the trade deadline, and I think if he wasn't hurt, there's probably a decent chance he would have been traded. But when he's hurt, again, the value was even lower than before. And the Kings ultimately do want to try to get something back for him. They aren't just trying to unload him because there is potential there. I'm not really high on his long-term prospects. I think he could find NBA success, but if he does, it's probably not in Sacramento just because there's so many expectations, so much history. There are things he does well. I just don't know if they're ever going to be enough to kind of live up to that standard of success that's going to be there in Sacramento. Just given where he was picked, who he was picked ahead of, there's a lot of baggage there. And there's also the question of, can he stay healthy? If he ever stays healthy for a full season, he's always been a solid contributor. And I mentioned it before, he's not a good defender by any means. He's a very, very bad defender. He can score. He can do some rebounds. I mean, he has not done either of those at an exceptional level, but he's shown flashes where I could see where someone could still buy into him. I understand why some people still have hope. I just think if he's successful, it's probably not going to be here.
Are they going to, and I know starting lineups don't necessarily mean as much, but is he going to, it seems like it should be Barnes, Haliburton, Fox, and Holmes in the starting lineup, and that 5th spot is sort of up for grabs. Do you think that's just going to go to him as sort of a ceremonial start, or is someone else going to get that final slot? Am I even wrong on the 4 locks of the starting 5?
No, I think those 4 are locks. I don't think that there's any question there. I think that he's in competition for it. I don't know that we've really seen anything that stands out to suggest he should be the one to end up with that, at least not at the start of the season. I would put my money on Buddy Hield.
Okay.
I think that that's probably the likely starter. I mean, he played a fair amount of small forward in small ball lineups last year, and especially in offense, those lineups were very good. I mean, again, they had defensive issues, but I think that that's probably the most likely starting line.
I'm just curious. I guess if you go that route, it feels like you're really, I know they can stagger minutes, but it feels like Buddy Hield should be like really important off the bench when you're looking at the rest of the players that are going to be coming off the bench. Like they could be hard up for floor spacing in those second unit heavy lineups.
And I think some of that will come down to staggering. Some of it is just that the Kings obviously are also shopping Buddy Hield. And I mean, he was 2 seconds away from being a Laker until suddenly Westbrook's available and the Lakers shift gears. I think they're still trying to move him when they can. I'd be surprised if he's with them at the end of the year. And the big thing with Buddy is he is a guy who cares deeply about whether he's the starter or not. And if he could accept that bench role as being the guy who goes out and scores buckets against second units, he would probably have a much better view of like his value around the league and value to contract and all those different things. He just is a guy who's not happy in that situation and tends to be pretty vocal about it. And so I think at least at the start, they're going to probably roll him out just from that combination of we know he can do it. We know that can work in its own way. And then you kind of stagger lineups from there. But I also wouldn't be surprised if we see Walton tinker with that 5th starter a fair bit, especially early on in the year.
It does feel like they have a pretty clear hierarchy of 7 guys who will play a bunch when you look at, the 4 locks at starters and Fox, Haliburton, Barnes, and Holmes. Tristan Thompson, by virtue of being a backup center, Davion Mitchell, and then Buddy Hield. How do you see sort of the back end of that rotation? Like if you had to pick the final 3 players, let's just assume they're going with a top 10 rotation, who are the 3 players that you would expect to round the rest of that out?
I think the biggest one's going to be Harkless. I think he's going to play a lot. Just again, positional versatility. He can play that small ball 4. He can play 3, so they can do different things there. I do think Bagley will still be a heavy part of the rotation as long as he's there. And then the other 2 guys kind of for that 10th spot are going to be a combination, probably Terrence Davis and Alex
Len. I'm not a fan of Terrence Davis as a person, but I think he would be a better fit for the rotation than an Alex Len, who is catching strays from Karl Anthony Towns interviews.
Yeah, I mean, off-court issues aside, it's so tough with Terrence Davis because there's a lot of concerning things off-court. If we just look at him on court, he is talented but streaky. I mean, he has moments where he looks really awful, and there's times when he looks amazing. And he has kind of that weird it factor. When you watch him, it's just like, that guy just looks like he's doing good things on a basketball court. Sometimes he's not actually doing good things, but he just kind of is that guy that looks like he belongs on the floor more.
Got the aesthetics down.
To explain. Yeah, absolutely. Alex Len, I think that really where that's going to come in is just matchup space, because Tristan Thompson, Richaun, Holmes, Barnes, none of those guys can handle the truly larger bigs in the league, and that's why they brought Alex Len back, because they missed having that size, that presence inside. And I mean, he had a great year or a great stretch the last time he was in Sacramento, and losing him, they really did miss that big presence when the matchups dictated.
We might have already jumped on this, but whether it's a specific position or just skill set or just functional void that this team is missing, what do you view as their biggest weakness heading into this season?
It really is that more traditional wing, and specifically, not from an offensive standpoint, it's more from the defensive side of things.
Right.
And there's a lot of really talented, large wing players in the league. And that's kind of goes back to that Ben Simmons idea. Is part of the reason why that's appealing is because that solves that issue. even if you want to still call him a point guard and call it a 3-guard lineup, he solves that defensive issue as far as the larger wings in the league, the ball dominant scoring. I mean, that's where the Kings have struggled in recent years. And I mean, Harrison Barnes is a solid enough team defender, but he's not a lockdown guy. Mo Harkless is more valuable for his defense than his offense, but he's not a lockdown guy. I mean, they don't have anyone who can really lock down an opponent wing star at this point, and that's a big problem in today's NBA.
So when you look at this roster, as of now anyway, and things can change clearly as the season rolls on, who would be the player that you deem most likely to get traded before the deadline?
I still think it has to be Buddy Hield. I mean, I think they're going to still try to move Bagley, but I think that the difference between Bagley and Buddy is that Buddy has a very definable, valuable skill in the NBA. And we just saw where, with how close it was to that Lakers trade, there's going to be a team who sees that shooting and sees the declining contract year over year, that Buddy's valuable, especially if you have other pieces, that are more defensive oriented that can cover up for some of those weaknesses. I've always thought he made a ton of sense for the Sixers, whether it ends up being part of a Simmons trade or not. I mean, he's exactly what the Sixers need, because they've got defensive players who could cover his weaknesses, who could, cover up for his mistakes, and his shooting, his scoring, he's truly an elite volume shooter in the NBA. It's just kind of hidden away in Sacramento, so no one really thinks about it. But when you just look at the raw numbers, he never misses games. He makes a ton of threes. He does it at pretty solid efficiency. There's going to be someone that sees value in that at some point, and the Kings I think will find a deal.
When you look at the Kings, and we talked about it with regard to Ben Simmons, they do seem like they're kind of built for a consolidation trade just in the makeup of their roster and sort of I don't want to say the urgency of their timeline, but you've paid De'Aaron Fox, you have some good NBA players. There is that oomph, that nudge to go and get maybe a star or a quasi-star. But is this also a team that could emerge as like one of the bigger sellers at the deadline, just because the crux of their core, if you look at it as Haliburton, Fox, and Davion Mitchell, really is still so young? If this season goes off the rails to start, which I would just argue in the Western Conference is eminently possible, do they look at moving, like sort of committing to the bigger picture direction where anyone is gettable except for one of those three?
Normally,
the distaste on your face is palpable right now.
Normally, yes, that would make perfect sense. The reason I don't see that happening at all is because that strategy made perfect sense at last year's trade deadline. And instead, the Kings made moves that were more like win now, taking on salary, limiting cap flexibility. They brought in DeLon Wright, who ended up getting flipped this offseason, but that was the move that took away their cap space to have more flexibility to bring back Holmes. They were set up like it was pretty clear to anyone paying attention that the Kings were probably not going to be a playoff team last year.
Right.
And they brought in vets and brought in win now guys instead of like selling pieces and kind of bottoming out for the lottery. And this year's squad is even more built for win now than what they started with last season. I mean, the Kings seem very much built on trying to end the playoff drought, for better or for worse. I mean, we've seen this before with the Kings where, damn the future, we're going to make the playoffs, we're going to be the 8th seed, and that's part of the cycle of why we're at year 15 on the playoff drought. I don't see that changing. And some of that also is just because you look at Monty McNair, where he came from the Rockets. And that Rockets tree was always screw draft picks. We'll trade everything we can to get stars. And it seems very much like since he got here, McNair's strategy has been to build an asset base that could then be turned into a star via trade.
I think I don't like oversimplifying timelines to this where it's championship or bust, because it's definitely more nuanced than that. And I don't have a problem that that's their stance. I think I'm almost at the point though where it's go out and do it. And I know that it's dependent on who's actually available. But like it's
Right.
time to make that move if that's what you're going to set up for. Because I do think, and we'll get into this very shortly, that they are in danger of kind of just falling into like that 11th, 12th spot of no man's land in the West. And like, that's not great. Like like you said, year 15 of a playoff drought. And so I would rather I don't want to say they don't have a discernible direction. I would like them to very clearly be leaning one way or the other. And it feels like they're just too entrenched in that like obscure area of the Western Conference.
For sure. And I mean, the Western Conference is brutal in that regard, right? I mean, this team, if they were in the East, we'd be like, yeah, they could make even 8 seed, like no big deal, like, right? I mean, the playoff drought would have been over several times over the past 15 years. It's just the nature of the Western Conference. But yeah, I mean, if the Kings miss the playoffs this year, they will own the longest playoff drought in NBA history, longer than at that point than the longest drought the Clippers ever had, which dated back to their time in Buffalo, to their time in LA. And I don't think the Kings want that. I don't think that the ownership wants that. I don't think the GM wants to be the one who couldn't end that. I mean, there's nothing there that suggests that they're going to be okay if they miss it again. And right now, they're not really built that way. And you are somewhat at the mercy of who becomes available and what you're willing to give up. But you can only say patience so long to a fan base that has gone this long without any success.
This question is matchup dependent to some extent, but what do you think should be their most used or will be their most effective crunch time unit?
Oh, it is tough because there's not the clear-cut answer. I think it will be very matchup dependent. I mean, I would not be surprised at all if I mean, it depends how much they're down, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw crunch time minutes with Davion Mitchell, De'Aaron Fox, Haliburton, Holmes, and Barnes.
Do you think those like four I've outlined as locks as starters, or those four like probably also like is there a situation where you're taking Barnes off the court in crunch time or Holmes? Like I just don't see a reason to. So it feels like four of those spots are pretty much sewn up then.
Yeah, I mean Holmes and Barnes are both excellent two-way players. I mean neither of them are superstars or anything like that, but what they do extremely well, and they don't have a glaring weakness in their game. Now, there were times down the stretch where they might pull Holmes for like spacing or, specific defensive matchups, all matchup dependent. But generally speaking, I think that those four are probably locks for the crunch time lineup as well.
Is there a wonky, weird, out of left field, unconventional, whatever lineup that you're hoping they try, even if it's going to end up being disastrous?
I wouldn't hate to see them at least give like that crazy try to some insane 4-guard lineup. Yeah, just given their guards, right? Like do Mitchell and Fox and Haliburton and Buddy, and then like Alex Len just for like size to like protect the rim, right? Like just do something crazy, right? Like I don't think it'll work, but it'd be fun to watch.
That was almost mine to a T, except I threw out the pretense of size and said, put Harrison Barnes or Mo Harkless there and just go. Just see what happens.
I will say that some of the better preseason minutes we've seen for like Buddy Hield and Marvin Bagley both came with Alex Len on the floor because for all his issues, he is a large person who stands in the middle and can deter guys who are getting in the lane. So I do think that he'll have a role there. And if you're looking at an all-guard lineup that's just going to basically be a funnel to the middle, you do need a big guy who you're not worried about picking up a couple quick fouls.
Luke Walton can play whoever the hell he wants as the fifth guy if those four guards are on the court at the same time. Sacramento and Portland, and then there's another team, I can't remember which. There's like 3 teams I need to see the 4-guard lineups from. In Portland with like Simons and CJ and Dame and Powell. But so I can't remember what the other team is off the top of my head. As we record this, man, the people who do these lines are really good. The Kings win total is set at 35.5. Are you taking the over or the under on that? And where do you see them stacking up in just the larger Western Conference picture?
Uh, so as a general rule, I would never recommend anyone. So anyone listening, I would never recommend betting the over on a Kings line. It's a very easy way to lose money. They have done it once or twice during this drought. Personally, if I had to make a bet on it, I would take the over. And I actually did go ahead and place a bet on the Kings making the playoffs this year.
Wow.
I bet a whole $1. I don't bet big, so I'm just going to put that in context. I bet $1 to win $14. But that bet is more around the idea of there's going to be a trade that changes the look of this roster. Like it just feels like that has to happen this season. But I've also said that like the last year and a half. So take that for what it's worth.
I'm almost inclined to go with the under unless you can tell me that trade is going to happen. I was a fan of it. Felt very much theoretical and nothing that was actually necessarily being discussed to a real extent. But I was a big fan of the Pascal Siakam to Sacramento ideas. And Simmons obviously elevates your ceiling in a different way, but I actually love Siakam's fit with the overarching roster if you're keeping Haliburton and Fox as part of that scenario as well.
No, I totally agree. Obviously, there's some health concerns. He had obviously a very down year, but I think it's a decent risk for a team trying to break out of kind of a rut. Before last season when he was healthy and everything else that was going on last year, he just an incredible player, and the fact that he was even maybe on the market was kind of a nice opportunity. So there was a lot of talk, over the summer amongst our readers around, do they go for Simmons? Do they go for Siakam? I would be in favor of going for either one, as long as, like you said, you're keeping Fox or Fox and Haliburton. It's kind of the difficult part is the two players that everyone wants in those trades are the two you're trying to hold on to pair with the guy you're bringing in.
With Fox, it's like I feel like you need to keep him in any star trade because the whole idea would be pairing two stars together. And right. Haliburton is like, that needs to be consensus. Bradley Beal's coming and is saying he's going to resign territory, like that type of a player.
Exactly. The only way you're giving up, the only way they're giving up Haliburton is truly one of those absolute superstars is available. He's going to be there long term, which the debate then is, does Simmons qualify as that level of superstar, which I understand why people don't, right? There's obviously the lack of the offensive firepower, the shooting, all of those different pieces. And for better or worse, defense just isn't valued the same way in the modern NBA, just the way the rules are and everything else.
So are you ready to get into Kyrie to Sacramento trade packages? Just kidding. Is there anything...
I'm driving through a tunnel.
Is there anything I didn't ask you about this team or anyone I didn't ask you about that you think needs to be touched upon?
You haven't asked the obvious question of, does Luke Walton make it through the season?
I'm just that guy has like Teflon on him. I can't believe he's still there. You're mentioning the defensive coordinator is gone, and yet Luke Walton's tenure indoors. Fantastic, awesome.
Yeah.
and are we going to be complaining, or am I going to be complaining mid-season about why are the Kings not playing fast enough? Like that just seems like a rite of passage. At some point in the season, they slow things down for some reason.
Yeah, and the natural successor, if you look at their bench, is that Alvin Gentry would probably take over as the interim, and I don't know if that's necessarily better. It would just kind of be something different. So, I was very surprised when Monty McNair came out and basically gave a stamp of approval after the Kings completely shit the bed down the stretch and blew their chance at even making the play-in.
If they make the playoffs, he's probably getting a contract extension or something. It's probably something that I'm just saying. If you had to choose,
don't do this to me. No, what you have to hope is that if the Kings make the playoffs, they then view this as now's the time to make our Mark Jackson to Steve Kerr switch, right? Like we got to the playoffs and now we get a better coach.
I guess that could unfold that way. My guess would be after ending that long playoff drought, it wouldn't unfold that way.
No, probably not. That's not I can't have nice things. I'm a Kings fan.
If you had to guess, do you think that if they miss the playoffs, do you think he's gone?
I think so. And part of the reason I think that is that, as far as I'm aware, McNair doesn't have a super long contract. I think that not this season, but next season would be the final year of his contract. So it's kind of like the firing the coach is kind of that bullet in the gun to keep the pressure off him, and obviously we've got an owner who, grows impatient with people who don't succeed right away. So I don't think Walton could survive another bad season. Yeah. Man, now you got me rooting against making the playoffs. What are you doing to me here?
You were the one that brought up Luke Walton. I almost exited the podcast without even asking you about his future.
But we can't. It's so inexplicably tied to what the Kings are going to do and how good they can be that there's very little in his entire coaching history to suggest that Luke Walton can maximize the players on these rosters.
He's just I don't consider myself just like this tactical savant, but he is just so frustrating with how he's coached this team. And that obviously says nothing of the off-court stuff with him too. Just the Kings in general, just never feel like they're playing the way that they should be. And do you even have the single most frustrating thing about him, or is it just this smorgasbord of bullshit?
The most frustrating thing is that, and I think it's a big part of why I think players like playing for him, is that it just doesn't feel like, and to his credit, maybe this is all just happening behind the scenes and I don't see it, but it doesn't ever feel like there's accountability when players are just checked out. It doesn't feel like there's accountability when players are doing really dumb things on the floor. There's never an adjustment. This guy just got, Buddy Hield just got yanked because he, pulled up on the 30-footer instead of running the set play. It just doesn't seem to ever happen. And players do love playing for him. That has been made very clear through everything we've heard, that the players really do enjoy playing for him. But then we see a halftime speech when the Kings are trying to make the play, and it's just the most dull thing I've ever seen. No one seems engaged or to care or anything like that. And it's what is happening here? Are players just happy because they're collecting checks and no one's yelling at them, or what's happening?
It says a lot about the expectation of the organization too, that you've had Buddy Hield. He liked a tweet that I sent about him being stuck in Sacramento last year from a brand account, and that was just business as usual. He almost gets traded to the Lakers, and I just feel like it's not talked about enough that now they're trying to bring back someone who's been obviously disgruntled before he was even semi-officially traded. Is that a behind the scenes concern at this point?
So again, Sacramento is not the place that gets kind of the big media spotlight, but Buddy Hield's media day was the most hilariously passive aggressive thing I've ever seen. He's talking about they love me in Sacramento, that's why I'm still here. And he's not saying it in any way where anyone can spin it as him being mad, but it's clearly I did not think I'd still be here, man. What am I doing here? He's talking about yeah, I'm everyone's friend. That's why I'm Buddy, Just I get along with everyone. Whatever they need me to do is fine. You could tell he was looking at all right, I'm going to be playing in LA next to LeBron and AD, and now it's it's not that he necessarily dislikes anyone on the team, but to go from having that yanked out from under you to just being back in Sacramento, it's obviously
they draft another guard,
right? It's hey, we drafted a guy who plays defense.
I would be. I guess it's the Kings, so I shouldn't say I'd be super surprised, but I'd be modestly surprised if he finishes the season in Sacramento this year. He's clearly the player most likely to be traded, just as you mentioned, because he has value. I think at this point, you don't settle for anything just to move him, but just everything that's happened, it's almost just a wonder that he's still on this team.
Yeah, it's wild. And some of it has been that McNair has not wanted to just sell low. He hasn't just been looking to get rid of guys for the sake of getting rid of guys and taking a crap return. Like, he's held out for a decent return, and if he doesn't like the offer, he's not going to make the deal. He's been patient enough that he's willing to have the team play through some awkward situations or some bad fits or whatever it might be. And you look at what was the room in return. I mean, Kyle Kuzma, Montrezl Harrell, and maybe a first-round pick. Compared to what we were talking about the Kings dumping Buddy for at the trade deadline, that seemed like a really great return. I mean, I'm not the biggest Kuzma fan, and Harrell obviously has his issues, but, like, if you added those guys to the roster instead of what they currently have, like, the roster balance makes a lot more sense. Like, suddenly Kuzma is, like, slotted in. You know, you've got Holmes and Barnes, Kuzma, Haliburton, and Fox. Like, that starting five makes a lot more sense than what they currently have. Like, so that's where I kind of see that trade going, is not necessarily that they're getting something amazing in return, but something that just kind of balances the roster in a way that makes some sort of sense.
And maybe even just breaking him up into two players, like two digestible contracts at this point.
That was the other thing. I mean, Kuzma, for whatever faults he has, I mean, he probably would have gotten more of a scoring role than what he had in LA. I mean, there was a chance that the Kings were buying a little low. He could have boosted his value, become a trade chip. Harrell, the expiring contract. I mean, player who, again, has limitations, but also has some value and does some things well. I mean, he's a year removed from Sixth Man of the Year. I mean, turning Buddy Hield's contract into two smaller contracts for productive rotation level players wouldn't have been a bad move overall. And if the Kings could get something similar to that, I could see that's where the deal happens again.
I like have trouble finding good Buddy Hield fits where it's like he fits everywhere. I'm just not sure who would be giving up value to get him. And then the teams where I could see them doing that, it's like with Philly, their contract situation is so weird when you're looking at sending out matching players. Like, are they trading Danny Green in that scenario? Because, like, the Kings don't want Tobias Harris unless it's part of a bigger trade. You're not getting Ben Simmons. So it's so complicated. But I do think he's a very valuable player. I hope his post game. I'm mad that I missed those media day comments. So I don't mean to root against you, but I could stand to see some awkward post game press conferences this season. So maybe I'll be entertained by that.
I mean, I would go look at it. He didn't talk to the media very long, and it's very funny, like, especially just kind of knowing the context of he was almost gone and now he's back. It's just very, very funny, because he's clearly just kind of throwing out stuff that he's kind of messing with people. But, I mean, it's not like an angry, like, I'm going to ruin the locker room vibe. It's just kind of like hey, guys, I'm still here. Like,
yeah, like, and maybe,
none of us expected this.
And maybe like his, rebellion will be a little bit subtle, where it's like averaging a career high of pull up 30 footers per game, just like taking one of those every night that are just so ill advised or something. I don't know, but now I'm going to be watching more closely than ever after hearing that he was a little passive aggressive in his media day. That's great.
Yeah.
Greg, are you able to tell our listeners where they can find you on social media and the work that you do?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at GWiz, GWISS. You can also find me at kingsherald.com. That's our website. We're an independent website that covers the Sacramento Kings. And you can follow the website at the Kings Herald.
Kings Herald's fantastic. My go-to for Kings coverage. Follow him I'll follow Greg on Twitter at GWiss. That's at GWISS. He will police your tweets if you say that you are working and then end up tweeting. He will be in your DMs. But Greg, this was fantastic as always. Thank you for giving me so much of your time.
Of course, anytime.
What's going on, everyone? I'm Claudia Bellafato, and he is
Joe Fan.
This is Bet to Win. We talk betting. Break down the lines. We have the traders come on each week. We have some experts come on to talk boxing, UFC. We talk football. We talk basketball, baseball. What else do we talk about, Joe?
We make fun of each other.
We make fun of each other.
We have a whole lot of fun doing it.
We do.
So come join us. Let's pick some winners, lament the losers, have a good time doing it. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. New episodes out every Monday and Thursday.